The comforting aroma of golden garlic and fresh herbs filled the kitchen of Sabores da Familia, while Vesper Moretti, with his gray hair tied back in a loose bun, carefully stirred a pot of tomato sauce. His brown eyes, marked by wrinkles of expression, shone with the satisfaction of someone who knows every secret of that centuries-old recipe. The kitchen, with its white tiles and hanging copper utensils, was the beating heart of the restaurant. It was there that Vesper felt truly at home, surrounded by the aromas and flavors that had been passed down for generations. Every pot, every wooden spoon, every weathered plate told a story. The story of her family, of her legacy. As she worked, moving with the grace of a dancer between the stoves and worktops, the kitchen door suddenly opened. Draven, her husband, entered with heavy steps, his face a mask of disapproval. "That sauce again, Vesper?" he asked, his tone laden with disdain. "How many times do I have to tell you that we need to innovate? Customers want something new, something modern." Vesper felt her heart squeeze but kept her composure. She turned to Draven, wooden spoon in hand, and replied calmly, "This sauce is what brought us here, Draven. It's the heart of family flavors. The heart of the restaurant is getting old and tired, just like your ideas," Draven retorted, his cold eyes fixed on Vesper. The tension between them was palpable, filling the air like a dense fog. Vesper could feel the weight of the unspoken words, the silent accusations that had accumulated over the years. She turned back to the stove, trying to concentrate on the gentle bubbling of the sauce. "Perhaps," she said softly, "we can find a compromise. Keep our traditions, but add some new dishes to the menu." Draven let out an exasperated sigh. "Middle ground doesn't fill tables, Vesper. Middle ground doesn't pay the bills." Before Vesper could reply, the kitchen door opened again. This time it was Nisa, the young chef who had joined the team a few months ago. Her bright eyes immediately picked up on the tension in the room. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt," she said hesitantly. "I just came to get some more rosemary for the lamb." Vesper forced a smile. "Of course, dear. It's over there in the corner." As Nisa picked up the herbs, Draven cast one last disapproving glance at Vesper and left the kitchen, leaving a heavy silence behind. Nisa approached Vesper, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Moretti?" Vesper nodded, grateful for the young woman's concern. "Yes, dear. Just a few differences of opinion about the menu." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of preparations and service. Vesper moved around the kitchen with the efficiency of decades of experience, but her heart wasn't fully in it. Draven's words echoed in her mind, mingling with the doubts she had long tried to ignore. As the evening progressed and the flow of customers diminished, Vesper finally had a moment to breathe. She leaned on the kitchen worktop, closing her eyes for a moment, when she heard a familiar voice. "Vesper, may I come in?" It was Amara, a frequent customer who had become a friend over the years. Vesper cracked a genuine smile for the first time that day. "Amara, of course. Come in. Good to see you." Amara entered the kitchen, her eyes shining with admiration. "Ah, Vesper, dinner was as divine as ever. That gnocchi took me right back to childhood." Vesper felt a wave of warmth and gratitude spread through her chest. "Thank you, dear. It means a lot to hear that." Amara moved closer, taking Vesper's hands in hers. "You know, every time I come here, it's not just for the wonderful food, it's the memories. I remember coming here with my parents as a child, and now I bring my own children. This place is more than a restaurant. It's a piece of our history." Amara's words touched Vesper deeply. She felt tears forming in the corner of her eyes, but held them back. "Thank you, Amara. You don't know how much this means to me." After Amara left, Vesper stood in the silent kitchen reflecting. Her friend's words had rekindled something inside her, a reminder of the true value of family flavors. It wasn't just about innovation or tradition, it was about connections, memories, the fabric that bound the community together. With a determined sigh, Vesper began to clean the kitchen, preparing for the day ahead. She knew that the challenges were far from over, but at that moment, she felt renewed, ready to face whatever came. As she closed the restaurant, Vesper couldn't imagine the storm that awaited her at home. Draven's revelation about her affair would be a devastating blow, but also the catalyst for a journey of self-discovery and rebirth. For now, she left family flavors with a slightly lighter heart, carrying with her the comforting aroma of garlic and tomatoes and the warmth of amorous words. The night was just beginning, and with it, the first chapter of a new story for Vesper Moretti. The morning sun had barely begun to gild the windows of family flavors when Vesper arrived in the kitchen. Her eyes were swollen and red, silent witnesses to a night spent in tears. Draven's revelation about her case still echoed in her mind, every word a stab in her heart. As she prepared the coffee, her hands trembled slightly. The familiar aroma of freshly brewed coffee, which usually comforted her, now seemed strangely empty. Vesper wondered how she could face another day, how she could smile at the customers and pretend that her world hadn't fallen apart. The kitchen door opened softly and Nisa entered, her eyes immediately taking in Vesper's state. The young chef hesitated for a moment before approaching. "Mrs. Moretti, is everything all right?" Vesper tried to force a smile but failed miserably. "Ah, Nisa, Her voice failed her, and before she could stop herself, tears began to fall. Nisa didn't hesitate. She approached and wrapped Vesper in a tight hug. "It's okay, Mrs. Moretti. I'm here." For a few minutes they stayed like that, Vesper letting out all the pain and confusion she had stored up during the night. When she finally calmed down, Nisa gently guided her to a chair. "Do you want to talk about it?" Nisa asked softly. Vesper took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words before she even spoke them. "Draven, he's having an affair." Nisa was silent for a moment, processing the information. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Moretti. That's terrible." "I don't know what to do, Nisa," Vesper confessed, her voice almost a whisper. "This restaurant, it's all I have. It's my life, my legacy. But Draven, he wants me to sell it. He says we're stuck in the past." Nisa leaned forward, her eyes shining with an intensity that surprised Vesper. "Mrs. Moretti, can I be honest with you?" Vesper nodded, curious. "This restaurant is stuck in the past. It's a bridge between the past and the future. It's living history, constantly evolving. And you, Mrs. Moretti, are the heart of it all." Nisa's words touched something deep in Vesper. It was as if a small flame of hope had been lit in her chest. "You know," Nisa continued, "I've been thinking a lot about family flavors. And I had an idea. What if we created a special menu? Something that paid homage to your family's legacy but also brought a touch of novelty." Vesper blinked, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "Well, we could take traditional recipes and give them a modern twist, or create dishes inspired by your family stories. Imagine, each dish telling a part of the Moretti story." As Nisa spoke, Vesper felt something awaken inside her. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced for a long time, enthusiasm. That could work," Vesper murmured, her mind already beginning to work on the possibilities. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of ideas and planning. Vesper and Nisa pored over old Moretti family recipe books, discussing possibilities and experimenting with combinations. The rest of the restaurant team, sensing the change in the air, joined in, offering suggestions and support. In the midst of the activity, Vesper found herself sharing stories from her childhood, her parents and grandparents. Each memory brought with it a flavor, an aroma, an emotion. "I remember my grandfather making gnocchi," Vesper recounted, his eyes shining with the memory. "He used to say that the secret was in the love he put into each dumpling." Nisa smiled, writing furiously. "What if we made a gnocchi, but with a sauce inspired by a story about your family?" The idea caught fire, and soon they were planning an entire menu based on the Moretti's memories and traditions. As the day progressed, Vesper felt a transformation taking place inside her. The pain of Draven's betrayal was still there, a weight on her heart, but now there was something else: determination. "Nisa," Vesper said, breaking a moment of silence as they reviewed their notes, "thank you for all of this." The young chef smiled, her eyes shining with admiration. "You're welcome, Mrs. Moretti. But you know, it all came from you. Your stories, your memories, your passion. I just gave it a little push." Vesper laughed softly, the first genuine laugh in days. "Well, sometimes that's what we need, isn't it? A little push." When night fell and the restaurant closed its doors, Vesper remained in the kitchen looking around. The place that only a day ago seemed like a burden, a reminder of her insecurities, now shone with possibilities. She picked up one of the old recipe books, her fingers tracing the yellowed pages with affection. This wasn't just a business, she realized. It was the legacy of generations, a story of love, perseverance, and family. With a determined sigh, Vesper closed the book. Tomorrow would be a new day, the first day of the rest of her life. And she was ready to face it, not as Draven's betrayed wife, but as Vesper Moretti, guardian of a legacy and creator of her own destiny. As she switched off the lights in the kitchen, Vesper felt a peace she hadn't experienced for a long time. The road ahead would be difficult, she knew, but for the first time in years, she felt truly alive. The seeds of change had been planted, and Vesper couldn't wait to see what would blossom. Dawn brought with it a fine mist that enveloped family flavors, as if nature itself was reflecting the tension that hung over the restaurant. Vesper arrived early, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the empty kitchen. She took a deep breath, feeling the familiar scent of spices and memories permeating the air. As she prepared the kitchen for another day, Vesper couldn't help but notice the small changes that had already begun to take shape. On the shelves next to the old family recipe books now rested the fresh notes from her work with Nissa. It was as if the past and the future were intertwining before his eyes. The ringing of the front doorbell announced someone's arrival. Vesper turned around, expecting to see Nissa or another member of the team. Her heart froze when she saw Draven enter, his face a mask of ill-concealed disdain. "So that's it," he said, his voice cutting through the morning silence. "You think a few new recipes are going to save this place?" Vesper felt a surge of anger rise in her chest, but held it back. "Good morning to you too, Draven," she replied, keeping her voice calm. "What brings you here so early?" Draven gave a dry laugh. "I've come to see if you've finally come to your senses. This place is dying, Vesper. It's time to sell up and move on." His words hit her like a punch, but Vesper stood her ground. "This restaurant isn't dying, Draven. It's evolving, and I'm not giving up on it." Draven's face contorted into an expression of fury. "You're so stubborn. Can't you see that you're dragging us all down?" Before Vesper could reply, the kitchen door opened again. Nissa walked in, stopping abruptly when she felt the tension in the air. "Is everything all right in here?" she asked, her eyes alternating between Vesper and Draven. Draven turned to Nissa, a fake smile on his lips. "Ah, the young chef. Tell me, do you really think you can save this place?" Nisa hesitated for a moment, but then straightened her shoulders. "Mr. Moretti, with all due respect, this restaurant doesn't need to be saved. It needs to be celebrated and renewed, and that's exactly what we're doing." The answer took Draven by surprise. He looked from Nissa to Vesper, his anger giving way to something more calculating. Well, see how long this celebration lasts when the customers start disappearing." With those words, he left the kitchen, leaving a heavy silence behind. Vesper let out a shaky sigh. "Thank you, Nisa. Nisa approached, placing a comforting hand on Vesper's shoulder. "No need to thank me. We're in this together, remember?" The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Vesper and Nissa worked side by side, refining the new recipes and preparing the restaurant for the day. The team arrived little by little, each bringing renewed energy and fresh ideas. It was in the middle of the afternoon that Vesper noticed something strange. The flow of customers, which was usually constant at this time, seemed to have decreased dramatically. She exchanged a worried glance with Nessa. "Something's wrong," Vesper muttered, her heart squeezing. As if to confirm her fears, Amara entered the restaurant, her face a mixture of concern and indignation. "Vesper, darling," Amara said, approaching the counter. "You won't believe what's happening out there." Vesper felt a chill run down her spine. "What is it, Amara?" "Draven," Amara said, the anger evident in her voice, "has on the street, bad-mouthing the restaurant to passers-by, saying that the food has lost its quality, that you've lost your touch." Vesper felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Draven's betrayal had reached a new level of cruelty. She looked around at the team watching her with expressions of shock and indignation. It was Nisa who broke the silence. "We can't let this happen," she said, her voice firm. "We have to do something." Vesper nodded slowly, a determination growing in her chest. "You're right. But what?" It was then that an idea began to form in Vesper's mind. She remembered social media, something she had always ignored, but which Nissa had mentioned several times as a powerful tool. "Nissa," Vesper said, a glimmer of hope in her eyes, "you know how to use these social networks, don't you?" Nissa smiled, understanding immediately. "Yes, I do, Mrs. Moretti. And I think I know exactly what we can do." The next few hours were an explosion of activity. While Draven continued his smear campaign outside, inside the restaurant a silent revolution was taking place. Nissa, with the help of some younger members of the team, began posting photos and videos of the process of creating the new dishes. Vesper, overcoming her initial hesitation, allowed them to film her preparing some of the traditional recipes, sharing the stories and memories associated with each dish. The authenticity and passion in her words was palpable, even through the screen of her cell phone. As the post gained traction, something incredible began to happen. Old customers started showing up, bringing friends and family. New faces, attracted by the tempting images and touching stories, began to fill the tables. The highlight came when Amara, who had left earlier, returned with a group of people. "Look who I brought," she announced with a triumphant smile. "Some friends who were hesitant to come after hearing certain rumors, but I convinced them to see for themselves." Vesper felt tears of gratitude forming in her eyes. She looked around the restaurant, now full of life and buzz. Nissa was standing in a corner, animatedly explaining the concept behind one of the new dishes to a group of curious customers. The staff moved around with a renewed energy, proud to be part of this renaissance. As the evening progressed, Vesper found himself at the center of an impromptu celebration. Old customers shared memories. New visitors expressed their admiration, and everyone seemed united by a sense of community and tradition. In a moment of calm, Vesper leaned against the kitchen counter, observing the scene before her. Nisa approached, a tired but satisfied smile on her face. "We did it, Mrs. Moretti," she said softly. Vesper nodded, her heart overflowing with emotion. "Yes, we did it. And that's just the beginning." As the restaurant continued to pulse with life and laughter, Vesper felt a certainty solidify in her heart. No matter what Draven or any other obstacle might throw in her way, she was ready to fight. Family Flavors wasn't just a restaurant. It was a legacy, a community, a story of love and perseverance, and that story was far from over. The morning sun had barely begun to gild the windows of Family Flavors when Vesper arrived, carrying with her the weight of a sleepless night and the determination of a new day. The success of the night before still echoed in her mind, a balm for her wounded heart, but she knew the battle was far from over. While preparing the kitchen for another day, Vesper couldn't help but notice how different the space looked now. The walls, which once seemed to suffocate her with memories of an immutable past, now pulsed with possibilities. Every pot, every utensil, every familiar scent was a reminder not only of what was, but of what could be. The ringing of the doorbell announced Nisa's arrival, her young face lit up by an infectious smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Moretti," she exclaimed, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "You won't believe what happened after we closed last night." Vesper raised an eyebrow, curious. "What is it, darling?" Nisa pulled her cell phone out of her pocket, her fingers gliding quickly across the screen. "Our social media posts. They've gone viral. We have hundreds of comments, shares, and people asking about reservations." Vesper's heart leapt. It was more than she could have hoped for, a ray of hope in the midst of the storm she was facing. "This is incredible," Vesper murmured, her voice laced with emotion. Nisa approached, placing a gentle hand on Vesper's shoulder. "It's more than incredible, Mrs. Moretti. It's the start of something new. People are rediscovering Family Flavors, and it's all thanks to you." Vesper felt tears forming in the corner of her eyes but held them back. It wasn't time to cry, it was time to act. "Well," she said, straightening her shoulders, "I guess we have a lot of work ahead of us, don't we?" The next few hours passed in a flurry of activity. The team arrived, bringing with them a renewed energy, inspired by the success of the night before. Vesper and Nisa worked side by side, refining recipes, planning new dishes, each idea a perfect fusion of tradition and innovation. It was in the middle of the afternoon, when the restaurant was full of customers eager to try something new, that the door opened violently. Draven walked in, his face contorted into a mask of barely contained fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he roared, advancing towards Vesper. The entire restaurant fell silent, all eyes on the scene that was unfolding. Vesper felt his heart racing, but he stood his ground. "I'm running my restaurant, Draven," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "What are you doing here?" Draven let out a bitter laugh. "Your restaurant? This place is as much mine as it is yours, Vesper, and I'm not going to stand by while you destroy it with these ridiculous novelties." Nisa stepped forward, placing herself protectively next to Vesper. "Mr. Moretti, with all due respect, I think you should leave. You're disturbing our customers." Draven's eyes turned to Nisa, full of disdain. "What about you, girl? Do you think you can save this place? That you can replace years of tradition with your modern ideas?" Vesper felt a surge of anger rise in her chest. It was one thing for Draven to attack her, but to see him turn on Nisa was too much. "Enough, Draven," she exclaimed, her voice echoing through the silent restaurant. You have no right to talk to my staff like that. This restaurant isn't being destroyed. It's evolving. And if you can't see that, maybe it's you who should leave." A murmur of approval ran through the restaurant. Customers and staff looked at Vesper with a mixture of admiration and respect. Draven seemed momentarily stunned by Vesper's outburst. His eyes scanned the crowded restaurant, the expressions of disapproval on the faces around him. For a moment it looked as if he was going to retreat, but then his eyes narrowed dangerously. "You think you've won, don't you?" he hissed. "But it's not over, Vesper. Far from it." With those words, he turned and left the restaurant, leaving a tense silence behind. Vesper let out a shaky sigh, feeling the weight of the confrontation. Nisa placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You were amazing, Mrs. Moretti," she whispered. Slowly, the normal buzz of the restaurant resumed. Customers returned to their meals, but Vesper could feel looks of sympathy and support directed at her. Amara, who was sitting at a nearby table, got up and approached Vesper. "Darling," she said softly, "you're not alone in this. We're all by your side." Vesper felt a wave of gratitude run through her body. She looked around at the familiar faces and the new ones, all united by their love for family flavors. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice laced with emotion. "Thank you all." As the afternoon turned into evening, Vesper found herself reflecting on the day's events. The confrontation with Draven had been painful, but also liberating. For the first time in years, she felt truly in control of her destiny. But Draven's final words echoed in her mind. It wasn't over, and Vesper knew she had to be prepared for whatever came next. As she closed the restaurant that night, Vesper made a silent promise to herself and her family's legacy. No matter what Draven planned, she would fight. For family flavors, for her team, for herself. The battle might not be over, but Vesper Moretti was ready to face the coming storm. With the strength of her community by her side and the passion for her art in her heart, she knew she could face any challenge that came her way. The chapter of her life that was now beginning would be written on her own terms, with the flavor of tradition and the spice of innovation. And Vesper couldn't wait to see what the future held. Dawn found Vesper sitting at the kitchen table in Sabores da Familia, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the familiar patterns on the faded tablecloth. The silence of the morning was interrupted only by the soft ticking of the old wall clock, a relic of simpler times. Her tired eyes wandered around the kitchen, absorbing every detail as if seeing them for the first time. The hanging copper pots, gleaming softly in the diffused morning light. The shelves full of spices, each jar containing not just flavors, but memories. The lingering smell of garlic and basil, as familiar as her own breath. A sigh escaped his lips, heavy with the weight of the last few weeks. The confrontation with Draven the day before still echoed in her mind, his threatening words hanging like a dark cloud over her thoughts. "It's not over, Vesper. Far from it." A shiver ran down her spine as she remembered the look in his eyes. Cold, calculating, almost dangerous. It was a side of Draven she had never seen before, or perhaps never wanted to see. The ringing of the front doorbell snapped her out of her thoughts. Vesper stood up, smoothing her apron with trembling hands, preparing to face another day. To her surprise, it wasn't Nisa or another member of the team who entered, but Amara. Her normally serene face was marked by worry lines. "Amara," Vesper asked, apprehension growing in his chest. "What happened?" Amara approached, her eyes scanning the space as if looking for prying ears. When she spoke, her voice was little more than a whisper. "Vesper, dear, there's something you need to know about Draven." Vesper's heart raced. "What is it?" Amara hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her next words carefully. "Last night, after the Incident. I heard something. Draven was on the phone outside the restaurant. He was talking about business. Illegal business, Vesper. The world seemed to spin around Vesper. She leaned on the kitchen table, feeling her legs go weak. Illegal? What do you mean? Money laundering, as far as I can make out, Amara continued, her voice trembling slightly. He mentioned using the restaurant as a front. Vesper, I think that's why he's so desperate for you to sell. He needs total control for his activities. Amara's words fell on Vesper like a bucket of cold water. Fragments of memory began to fall into place. Draven's sudden trips, the whispered conversations on the phone, the unexplained deposits into the restaurant account that he always justified as investments from friends. I can't believe it, Vesper muttered, more to herself than to Amara. How could I have been so blind? Amara moved closer, wrapping Vesper in a tight hug. Don't blame yourself, darling. Sometimes love blinds us to the truth that's right in front of us. Vesper allowed herself a moment of vulnerability, letting the tears she had been holding back for so long finally fall. It was as if a dam had broken inside her, releasing not only the pain of betrayal, but also years of repressed doubts and insecurities. When she finally pulled away from Amara's embrace, Vesper felt something new growing inside her. It wasn't just anger or hurt, but a fierce determination. "What are you going to do?" Amara asked softly. Vesper took a deep breath, feeling every fiber of her being strengthened with her resolve. "I'm going to fight, Amara. I'm going to fight for family flavors, for my family's legacy, for everything we've built here." At that moment, the kitchen door opened again. Nisa walked in, stopping abruptly when she felt the tension in the air. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her eyes alternating between Vesper and Amara. Vesper exchanged a glance with Amara before turning to Nisa. "Nisa, darling, we need to talk. There's something you need to know." Over the next few minutes, Vesper shared with Nisa everything that Amara had revealed. The young chef listened in silence, her eyes widening with each new piece of information. "My God," Nisa murmured when Vesper had finished. "What are we going to do?" Vesper felt a warmth of gratitude at hearing the "we" in Nisa's question. She wasn't alone in this battle. "First," Vesper said, her voice gaining strength, "we need to protect the restaurant. We can't let Draven use family flavors for his illegal activities." Nisa nodded vigorously. "I agree, but how?" It was Amara who spoke, her voice calm but determined. "I have a friend in the police department. Maybe we can start there, gather evidence discreetly." Vesper felt a chill run down her spine at the thought of involving the authorities. It wasn't just Draven who was at stake, but potentially the entire future of the restaurant. "And yet, you're right," she finally said. "We can't stand by while Draven destroys everything we've built." The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of planning and preparation. As the restaurant came to life around them, Vesper, Nisa, and Amara worked behind the scenes, strategizing and considering every possible angle. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the kitchen, Vesper found herself alone again. She looked around at the space that had been her home for so many years. Every corner held a memory. Every utensil told a story. Her eyes landed on the old photograph hanging near the stove, her and Draven on the day the restaurant opened, beaming smiles on their young faces. A twinge of pain ran through her heart, but it was quickly replaced by iron resolve. "I won't give up," she whispered to the photo, as if making a promise not only to herself, but to all the generations that came before her. "This place is more than just a restaurant. It's a home, a family, a legacy, and I will protect it, whatever the cost." As night fell over family flavors, Vesper felt for the first time in weeks a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, full of challenges and unknown dangers, but she was not alone. With Nissa, Amara, and the whole community by her side, Vesper knew she had a chance to save not only the restaurant, but also her own future. And she was determined to seize that chance with all her might. The real battle was just beginning, but Vesper Moretti was ready to face it head-on. The dawn brought with it an electric energy that hovered over family flavors. Vesper, already on her feet for hours, moved around the kitchen with an almost palpable determination. His eyes, although tired, shone with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Today was no ordinary day. It was the day of the charity event that she and Nissa had been meticulously planning for the past few weeks. An event that, Vesper hoped, would not only bring positive attention to the restaurant, but would also serve as a public declaration of her determination to preserve her family's legacy. Nissa entered the kitchen, carrying boxes of decorations. Her young face was lit up with an infectious smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Moretti. Ready for the big day?" Vesper couldn't help but smile in response. Nissa's energy and optimism were like a balm for his nerves. "As ready as I can be, darling." The next few hours passed in a flurry of activity. The team arrived, each member bringing with them renewed energy and a sense of purpose. Vesper watched with a heart full of gratitude as everyone worked in harmony, transforming the restaurant for the event. Tables were rearranged, decorations hung, and the aroma of special dishes began to fill the air. Vesper found herself lost in memories as she prepared some of her family's traditional recipes, each movement a silent homage to the generations that came before her. As the afternoon progressed, the first guests began to arrive. Vesper greeted them at the door, her heart warming with every familiar smile, every warm embrace. She saw the faces of old customers mixed with new ones, all united by the love of food and community that Sabores da Familia represented. Amara arrived accompanied by a group of important figures from the town, the mayor, some local businessmen, and even a reporter from the local newspaper. Vesper felt a mixture of pride and nervousness at the interest the event had generated. "Vesper, darling," Amara whispered as she hugged her, "you're doing something wonderful here. Everyone's talking about it." The event was in full swing when the door opened again. Vesper's heart stopped for a moment when she saw Draven enter. His face was contorted into a mask of barely contained rage, his eyes sweeping the crowded place with disdain. Nissa, who was standing nearby, immediately placed herself at Vesper's side, a comforting, protective presence. "Do you want me to throw him out?" she asked softly. Vesper hesitated for a moment, then shook her head. "No, let him stay. Let's not give him the pleasure of causing a scene." Draven approached, his gaze fixed on Vesper. "What do you think you're doing?" he hissed, his voice low but laced with venom. Vesper straightened up, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I'm celebrating the flavor of the family in our community, Draven, something you seem to have forgotten a long time ago." The tension between them was palpable, drawing curious glances from the nearby guests. Draven opened his mouth to reply, but was interrupted by the arrival of the mayor. "Ah, Vesper, what a wonderful event!" the mayor exclaimed, apparently oblivious to the tension. "And this must be your husband, Draven, isn't it? How nice to see the two of you together at this special moment." Vesper forced a smile, her heart beating fast. "Yes, it's a very special occasion." Draven, taken by surprise, muttered something unintelligible and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Vesper let out a sigh of relief, exchanging a meaningful glance with Nissa. The event continued, the buzz of conversation and laughter filling the air. Vesper moved among the guests, sharing stories about the restaurant, about his family, about the recipes that had been passed down from generation to generation. It was in the middle of one of these conversations that she noticed Draven again. He was in a corner, gesticulating furiously on the phone. His eyes met Vesper's for a moment, and what she saw in them made her shudder. It wasn't just anger, it was despair. In that instant, Vesper knew she had to act. Amara's revelations about Draven's illegal activities echoed in her mind. She could no longer remain silent. Heart-pounding, Vesper made her way to the center of the hall. Nissa, realizing her intention, quickly brought out a microphone. "Attention, please," Vesper called out, her voice trembling slightly. The hall gradually fell silent, all eyes turning to her. "I'd like to thank you all for being here today. Family Flavors has always been more than just a restaurant. It's a home, a family, a legacy." She paused, her eyes meeting those of Draven, who had returned to the lounge. "But sometimes, to preserve a legacy, we need to make difficult choices, face painful truths." A murmur went through the crowd. Vesper took a deep breath, gathering all her courage. "In recent months, I discovered that my husband Draven has been using the restaurant for illegal activities, money laundering to be specific." The silence that followed was deafening. Draven, his face pale with shock, stepped forward. "Vesper, what do you think you're doing?" he hissed. Vesper continued, her voice gaining strength. "I can't stay silent any longer. This restaurant, this legacy, means so much to me, to our community. I can't allow it to be used like this." The hall erupted in a hubbub of shocked voices. Draven, realizing he was cornered, tried to run for the exit, but was stopped by two police officers that Amara had discreetly called. As Draven was taken away, Vesper felt a wave of emotions wash over her. Relief, sadness, fear of the unknown, but above all, an overwhelming sense of liberation. Nissa approached, enveloping Vesper in a tight hug. "You were incredible," she whispered. "So brave." Gradually, the guests approached Vesper. There was no judgment in their eyes, only support and admiration. Amara was the first to speak. "Vesper, dear, you did the right thing, and you're not alone. We're all here for you." Amara's words seemed to open the floodgates. One by one, the guests approached, offering words of support, hugs, promises of help. The mayor assured them that he would do everything in his power to protect the restaurant from any legal repercussions. As the evening progressed, the event that had begun as a celebration of Sabores da Familia's past turned into something more, a promise for the future. A future free from the shadows of the past, a bright future full of possibilities. Vesper, surrounded by the warmth and support of her community, felt a peace she hadn't experienced for years. The road ahead would be difficult, she knew, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to face it. Sabores da Familia wasn't just a restaurant. It was a symbol of resilience, of community, of love. And now, more than ever, it was ready to write a new chapter in its history. The rising sun painted the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, its rays gently touching the windows of Sabores da Familia. Vesper stood in the kitchen, her eyes scanning the familiar space with a new gaze. Every pot, every utensil, every time-worn tile told a story, not just of the past, but now also of a future full of possibilities. Her fingers absent-mindedly traced the outline of an old photo on the wall, her and Draven on the day the restaurant opened. A pang of sadness ran through her heart, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of peace. The last few weeks had been a roller coaster of emotions, but Vesper felt she was finally coming to a place of acceptance and renewal. The soft tinkle of the doorbell announced Nissa's arrival. The young chef entered the kitchen, her face lit up with a warm smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Moretti," she greeted, her tone full of affection and respect. "Ready for the big day?" Vesper nodded, feeling a mixture of nervousness and excitement bubble up in her stomach. Today was the day they would unveil their plans for the expansion of Family Flavors, a new chapter not just for the restaurant, but for the entire community. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. The team arrived, each member bringing with them a contagious energy. Vesper watched with a heart full of pride as everyone worked in harmony, preparing the restaurant for the meeting to come. As Vesper finalized the last details of the presentation, his mind wandered back to the events of the last few weeks. Draven's arrest had been a shock to the community, but also a catalyst for positive change. The support she had received had been overwhelming, from customers, from friends, even from strangers who had heard her story. A movement at the door caught her eye. It was Amara, accompanied by a man in a suit who Vesper recognized as the lawyer who had helped her throughout the legal process. "Vesper, darling," Amara greeted her with a warm hug. "How are you feeling?" Vesper smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude for her friend. "Nervous, but ready. Thanks to you and everyone who supported us." The lawyer approached, holding out his hand. "Mrs. Moretti, I have good news. The judge has accepted our petition. The restaurant is officially free of any connection to Draven's activities. You now have complete control." The words hit Vesper like a wave of relief. She felt her eyes fill with tears, but this time they were tears of joy and gratitude. As the time for the meeting approached, the restaurant began to fill up. Familiar and new faces mingled, all united by their love for Sabores da Familia and their curiosity about its future. Vesper climbed onto the small makeshift stage, his heart pounding. Nisa was by her side, a comforting and encouraging presence. She looked out at the crowd, seeing anticipation and support on every face. "Welcome, everyone," Vesper began, her voice trembling slightly before gaining strength. "Family Flavors has been a part of this community for generations. It's been a home, not just for my family, but for all of you. And today, we're here to share the next chapter of this story." She paused, exchanging a glance with Nisa before continuing. "Over the last few months, we've faced challenges I never imagined. But through those challenges, I've rediscovered the true heart of Family Flavors. It's not just the recipes passed down from generation to generation, but the spirit of community, of family, that you all represent." A murmur of approval went through the crowd. Vesper felt his confidence grow. "That's why we're excited to announce our expansion, not just in size, but in purpose. The new Family Flavors will be more than a restaurant. It will be a community center, a place of learning and celebration of our culinary heritage." Nisa stepped forward, her face glowing with enthusiasm. "Well, be offering cooking classes, mentoring programs for young chefs, and a space for community events. We want Family Flavors to continue to be a place where memories are made and traditions are honored, but also where new stories can begin." The presentation continued, with Vesper and Nisa detailing their plans for the future. With each new revelation, the excitement in the room grew. Vesper could feel the support and enthusiasm emanating from every person present. When the presentation ended, the room erupted in applause. Vesper found herself surrounded by hugs, congratulations, and offers of help from all sides. The mayor approached, promising the city's full support for the project. As the celebration continued around her, Vesper found herself in a moment of silent reflection. Her eyes wandered around the room, taking in the joy and hope that filled the space. It was more than she could have dreamed of. Nisa approached, placing a gentle hand on Vesper's shoulder. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Moretti?" Vesper smiled, feeling a surge of affection for the young chef who had become much more than just an employee. She was a friend, a confidant, almost a daughter. "It's more than fine, darling," Vesper replied, her voice laced with emotion. "It's perfect." The two stood there for a moment, observing the scene before them. Family Flavors was full of life, laughter, hope. It was a new beginning, not just for Vesper, but for the whole community. If this story touched your heart, then don't forget to leave a like. Use the super thanks, located just below the video, to directly support the channel and help create more amazing content. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. Now, don't miss the next incredible story that's appearing on your screen. I greatly appreciate your support and hope to see you soon. Thank you for watching.